Caroline Flack, the television presenter, was declared dead.
The impact social media had on the late presenter's life.
There's no comeback on newspapers if they tell untruths. They can write what they like. But she used to get these bouts of depression. A lot of it was around her period. She'd beat him with a lamp. She was a domestic abuser. Just untrue. Bloodbath.
But people didn't realise that that was Caroline's blood.
No, we didn't know whether that was coming from the police. How would the media find out?
A new documentary series, Caroline Flack, Search for the Truth. The two-parter details the events leading up to the death of much-loved presenter Caroline Flack. It's told through the eyes of her mum, Christine, and talks about how the tabloids, the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, in Christine's eyes, very much failed Caroline. Here to tell us more is Caroline's mum, Christine. Welcome, Christine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's very special to have you here and to hear more about the docu-series that you've been working on with Disney. I would love to know, first and foremost, you know, there have been documentaries about Caroline in the past. What makes this one different?
I think this one is really factual. Disney have found out answers for me that I just couldn't find out myself. Being an ordinary person, you don't really know who to go to, who to approach. And over the last 4 years, the more questions that I've put to authorities, the less answers I seem to get. You know, they come up with, yeah, there were mistakes made and this shouldn't have happened, that shouldn't have, but nothing's ever done. And I could never really speak to anybody at the very top or that was in that business or in the police. And that's what this film has enabled me to do and get some proper answers.
And why did now feel like the right time for you and your family to take this to the public?
It wasn't my decision, really. You know, I was still just sort of working things out with the police and the IOPC and the newspapers, really. And then I was approached because of the first film that I did with Curious Films. They knew Caroline, and that's why we did the first film. It was sort of not a tribute, but it was trying to put over who she was. And they'd met her during all the sort of troubled times. And they said to me for the first film, shall we still do it? Which we did. And then just over a year ago, they came back to me and said, how have you been getting on with everything? And I just showed them all these sort of hundreds and hundreds of papers of, you know, answers that I'd been getting without really getting an answer.
Yeah.
And they said, would I be prepared to do, you know, more in-depth film? So I asked my children, and they find it difficult to come on screen themselves, but they don't mind me doing it. And they said, if you want to do that, Mum, that's fine. And that was it.
Yeah. When I was speaking to the producers about the series, somebody said, you know, you presented them with this huge stack of evidence that you'd been gathering for years, and it took them 6 weeks just to kind of read through everything. So can you tell us a little bit about what was the evidence that you were gathering, and what are the misconceptions about Caroline and her passing that you really want to get across with this film?
It started with the way the police had treated Caroline, and why the detective inspector that had come on duty that night and overheard just a conversation in the office really wanted to press for Caroline to be charged after the CPS had already thrown it out and said no. And after her boyfriend didn't want to press charges, I think he realised, oh, this is, you know, nothing really happened, but they still continued. And then for, you know, a couple of months afterwards, with all the efforts by her solicitor and her barristers, they weren't listening. They weren't listening at all. And so I'd been writing to, first of all, the police. That took 2 years to get an answer. And they said nothing to see here, everything was done correctly. I then went back and the IOPC started to investigate, and they did find that there had been errors made. They apologised to me for not investigating properly. They just said, oh, we're putting new measures, more learning. The detective inspector was put on a sort of training course. Because the one thing that really stood out was, although she was a detective inspector, she'd never, ever gone against a CPS decision before until Caroline.
Yeah.
And at the coroner's inquest, I was allowed to speak to her, and I said, how was Caroline that night? So I didn't see her, I didn't meet her.
Mm.
And yet she'd been in a cell for hours.
Yeah.
She wasn't in the interview. She had taken everything, what she'd overheard.
To sort of explain for people who haven't yet seen the documentary, it details how on the night that Caroline Lewis had their fight, she is on record as saying, I hurt him. My phone made contact with his head. A message had come through from another woman and she was angry, trying to wake him up. They'd both been drinking. But then what was reported by the press was very different to that. And the way that it was handled by the police, the Crown Prosecution Services, again, your family are putting forward the case that actually it was hugely disproportionate to what actually happened.
Yeah, and it was untrue. The things that were being written were untrue. It was being written that she'd beat him with a lamp. She was a domestic abuser. Everything was just untrue. And we didn't know whether that was coming from the police, because otherwise how would the media find out? And when Caroline appeared in court, they had a top prosecutor against her.
Which is quite unusual.
Oh, it's so unusual.
For this type of case.
Yeah. And she was allowed to say, but I think what we haven't found out is whether the police gave the prosecutor the information. Speaking to other police that I know, they say, well, yeah, they'd have to give her the information. And she was allowed in court to read out that there was a bloodbath, the lamp. She was allowed to repeat everything that wasn't true. And of course the press jumped on that. Yeah.
And there was so much written in the press, and as you mentioned the word bloodbath, that was very much closely associated with a particular image that was put on the front pages as well of Caroline's home. It's a really shocking, upsetting picture with blood everywhere, but people didn't realise that was Caroline's blood because she had hurt herself when she was upset.
Yeah, she'd cut her arms. Her boyfriend had taken a picture of it and sent it to a friend. I don't know why. It could have been, oh, look, she's really hurt. It could have been, what she's done. But that was, given to the press. And they didn't make any attempts at all to find out whose blood it was, because the story would be so much better if it was Lewis's blood.
And throughout all of this time, Caroline was advised by multiple people to remain quiet, and she wasn't able to have a voice in this. Do you think things would have gone differently and she might still be here today if she'd been able to speak about what was going on?
I don't know if they'd have been different if she'd been allowed. I wish we'd been able to try. But I don't think anything could have stopped the police and the CPS from doing what they did. They were, set on making an example of Caroline. And the thing is domestic abuse is so vile and so awful that this really was bad for domestic, because this wasn't domestic violence. And I think most people watching this or reading magazines, they've experienced it in some way in their lives with a family members or friends rather. So how bad that is. So to go run with this case was just ridiculous. So I don't think we could have stopped it. At the inquest, the detective inspector's barrister said to me, well, your daughter had a very good barrister. She, if she was innocent, she'd have got off. And, I said, well, Jesus could have been standing up there talking for her. There's no way you were going to change your mind. So I think that was the thing. There was no way out. There was no way out. And as you know, a journalist did try to get a good story. He knew her. He knew her well, and he knew the truth. But no one wanted to write it. No one wanted to print it.
It's not as salacious as putting that picture up and saying Caroline caused this.
And there's always people out there that won't believe it. They won't believe me now, that it'd be, well, of course she did. Well, she hit him with the lamp. She didn't.
Yeah.
She didn't, but it's out there.
The misreporting around the lamp, that came off the back of a police report from the initial night of the incident. Lewis actually says in this report that he didn't know what he'd been hit with, but he suggested it could have been a lamp. He suggested it could have been a fan. Caroline repeatedly says to the police, it was me, it was the phone. The lamp was never seized as evidence. That line was just taken from the police report, but lots of other lines were ignored. Lewis sustained very minor injuries. He did not require any treatment at hospital, whereas Caroline was in hospital for 12 hours before then being taken by the police. So Lewis was asleep at the time that Caroline approached him, angry and upset because she'd seen a message come through on his phone from another woman. When he'd threatened to call the police, that was when Caroline got very, very upset. The blood in this image, with the words bloodbath attached to it repeatedly, the blood in that photo was Caroline's blood, after Lewis had said about calling the police. Lewis did later try and retract what he'd said. He repeatedly said he didn't want to prosecute, but it was the Crown Prosecution Service that would not let this case lie. Christine and the family, you present it very much in a way which suggests that the CPS didn't want to let this case lie because they wanted to make an example of Caroline. They wanted to be seen to be doing something about domestic abuse, domestic violence, when what happened, you're saying it wasn't domestic violence, it wasn't domestic abuse. How did you and the team approach talking about domestic violence without almost seeming to gloss over what had happened? It's quite a fine
Because I think we all agree domestic violence is dreadful. Absolutely awful. So to mix this up with domestic violence is totally wrong. And as someone on the film explains, a man can beat a woman up, his wife, and still be allowed to go back to the house. Caroline and Lewis didn't live together. And as Caroline said, it was an accident. And Lewis said, he wrote he didn't write a statement to the police, but he wrote to the police saying, look, I'm really worried about mental health. It didn't happen, like I said. And so, it's just so difficult.
Yeah. And throughout this period, so, the night that everything happened was December, and the docu-series charts up to February when Caroline passed away. And within that, it shows Lewis posting on social media. They weren't able to have any contact. Lewis Burton was asked if he wanted to be involved in the documentary series, but he declined. Why do you think that was, and how do you feel about him not participating?
It isn't about sides. It was about what happened to Caroline, what the media did, what the police did, what the CPS did. It wasn't about personalities. People have arguments. He's gone on to have his, a life now, and he's got another life. So I don't think anyone had to be dragged back into this film. That's not what it was about. Her friend wanted to talk, Molly, and she was with Carrie a lot during those final months and knew things I didn't know. That was important. But Caroline hadn't seen Lewis after, the incident, or wasn't allowed to see him. And so it didn't seem really that relevant because everything he'd said was in writing.
Yeah, you felt he comes across, his side is presented. Yeah. Was there anything, you mentioned that Molly, came up with some new things that you hadn't heard before. What was the most surprising thing that you learnt during the experience of making this film? Probably
the timing of things, when Caroline found out different things to that effect. I didn't know how bad she was the night before she died. The friends were all there, but they hadn't actually said. And I think they knew I was going the next day, so it's like a protection thing. Jodie was going to see her in the morning that she died. And so they're just little conversations and things like that. I hadn't heard. There were some of the texts I hadn't seen. And, the voicemails I hadn't heard. And as well as, Lewis not appearing in the film, there were plenty of other people that you tried to get to speak to you as part of the docuseries, but they refused. Who do you really wish you'd been able to have had a sit down with to get more information from? I would love to have spoken to Mark Rowley. I would have loved to. I know he wasn't, it was Cressida Dick at the time. So the Met Commissioner, that is. The Met Commissioner, sorry. But he came in and he said, I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to make things better. So I would have loved for him to give me 5 minutes just to say why he thinks those things happened and that won't happen again. But the detective inspector at the inquest, when she was asked, would you do anything differently? Now you have heard all the evidence, she said no. So to me, there's someone still working there that could possibly do this again to someone. But he won't meet me. I did ask to meet Sadiq Khan because he's obviously Mark Waller's boss. No, he won't. His deputy spoke to me, you know, but there's nobody really that will sit and talk to you. So the people that, you know, we were able to speak to, you know, I'm so thankful to them, because, you know, they're still, you know, they may get, you know, things written about them now, but, you know, I'm so thankful to them.
And you mentioned in the series as well, you were trying to get hold of some of the tabloid editors who'd run these stories, printing things that were not true about the case and Caroline. And one big thing that you said that you would love to see is a full-page apology, the same size as the image of Caroline's house that was run on the front page of The Sun. Are you hopeful that
That's
will
the only
happen?
thing I'd want. I don't want, you know, people say, well, why don't you just sue? Money's nothing. I don't want anything like that, or even people to lose their job. Just the truth. Just put out there the truth. She did not hit anybody with a lamp. She was not a domestic abuser, and this was her blood because of how bad she'd felt that night, and because she thought, you know, another partner, you know, another betrayal. You know, I knew her so well. She didn't take those things well, and she would just feel she wasn't worth anything. She was worthless, and I think that's how she felt in the end.
It's so sad, and the programme really goes into Caroline's mental health history on a longer term basis as well, and you speak about how growing up she would be quite intensely emotional about things, and at one point it's mentioned that she was told by a doctor she may have bipolar disorder, but that was never confirmed.
No.
Do you think if she'd felt more comfortable speaking about her mental health with the public, that things would have gone differently if they'd been aware of that was her behind the scenes?
I think they may have done, but I don't think she would have ever spoken about it.
And why do you think that was?
I think she was told many times by people, oh, you're mad, you're mental. And I think she thought that. I think she thought that's how she was. That's, you know, behind the scenes where she was jolly. And she wasn't always down. You know, when she used to come home, we'd had some wonderful times, lots of nice times with her. But she used to get these sort of bouts of depression, and a lot of it was around her period. So I think that was more than bipolar. It wasn't bipolar. I think it was, you know, I think a lot of ladies get it. You get, and hers had been from a teenager, so intense. And then we used to laugh, Jodie and I would say, it's all right, because in 3 days' time she'll feel better. And she did. But again, that's not something I don't think ladies talk about. You know, we're just, it's a joke. You know, people say, oh, well, you know, it's her time of the month and things like that. It's so serious at times. It can affect your life so badly.
Absolutely. I feel like there's a lot more happening in terms of conversations around premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I think it's called PMDD.
Yeah, and I think that can be mistaken sometimes for bipolar.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that's I don't think women do want to always talk about it. I know it's, you know, a lot of people will come on and talk about it, and celebrities, and that's great, because if you're watching the TV and you think, oh, that's me, I've got that, you know, you can identify and you don't feel like this mad woman. But that just wasn't Caroline. She wouldn't, you know, she just wouldn't admit to that. And then when she was well and you spoke to her about it, she would go, oh, I'm fine now.
It's past.
It's past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost as though we've gotten to this point in society where we're so conscious of the importance of mental health awareness that we almost expect celebrities to come forward and tell us all their trauma. But Caroline was very private about that, and she wouldn't have ever done that.
Anything to do with sort of her medical history. As I said, she had so many doctors. When she died, they said, who's her doctor? And I didn't know. She'd go to different doctors. She had a couple of sort of spells in different little hospitals at times, and just, you know, relax. But then she'd come home and she'd be back to normal.
Yeah. How do you hope people will remember her after watching Search for the Truth? That, you know, there was so much written on social media as well, not just in the press. What would you like people to take away and remember Caroline for?
I think what I'd like them to remember her is how she actually was on TV. Because I think most people, if they met her, she was like that. She was like that all the time. I mean, her laugh and,
Great laugh.
She come indoors and with her nieces and nephews, she was fun. They loved her, and she had a nice life, and she always felt she was really lucky.
Yeah. And it seemed like her work was something that really gave her a lot of strength as well, and she clearly loved that so very much.
Yeah, it was the main thing, and the people that she met through that, and I think that was, has been sort of borne out by Flackstock and the people that run that, and really.
So that's the festival created in Caroline's memory.
Yeah, the festival. I mean, I don't have anything to do with that. People say, "Oh, it's great." I don't. It's the group of really wonderful women that were her friends, and it's a big thing to put on, and they're all working women with families, and they still do it. And the people that come, that's a lovely memory of her.
Mm. It sounds like, she had such an incredible support system, and it's heartbreaking that things ended the way that they did for her. And a lot of it seems to be the response from the public, and that feeling that maybe she wasn't as loved as she once was. And then once she passed away, as is so often the case with people, it's all be kind, all of those kind of messages appear on social media instead. Where do you think that comes from? That, the people that were saying the nasty messages, many of them probably then wrote be kind the next day. Do you think it's just misinformation, or do you think it's being bold by being anonymous? Where do you think this comes from?
I think when people write sort of nasty things or untruths, I don't think they're really thinking about it. I don't think they're thinking about the person they're writing about. And then a realisation when something happens to that person, when they take their own life, they think, oh, because it's done sort of flippantly. It's done without thinking. You go online, you write something. A gossip columnist, they want a story. They want and that's why, when you see these headlines, sometimes you go on to read the story. It's nothing to do with the headline, but the headline's out there, and a lot of people just read the headline. And they'll say to a friend, did you know so and so, and it will go round. So I think it's genuine that they're sorry afterwards, but I just think we've got to think about what we do before. And it was lovely when Be Kind was said everywhere. But it isn't just a saying, it is something we've got to do. And I think lots of people could learn by that. And it's not just to be, oh, be kind, that's a nice saying. If you don't mean it, it's nothing.
Yeah, it's meaningless, isn't it, if you don't actually put those words into action and reflect, I think. I think that's what the series does. It offers everyone a chance to reflect, especially towards the end.
So.
Yeah.
I hope so.
How do you feel about going in and doing lots of interviews with press now, given the way that they did treat Caroline? Are you nervous for the response as well?
I'm really nervous for the response, because there's already been, without some of the journalists seeing the film, they'd already written about it, what it was going to be about, and how I was feeling. So now when they see it, not all journalists. So I hate the thought that I'm saying, as I say, you probably know I worked for a newspaper for 30 years. I know there's amazing journalists out there, but I think there will be some things put in, and I'm not looking forward to that. But it can't stop you from trying to get the truth. It can't stop you. You have to try, and I'm doing that for Caroline. I'm not doing it for the gossip columnists and the Sun and everybody else. This isn't for them. It's for her.
And do you think that she would be happy with the final results?
I do.
Yeah.
I really do. I did wonder, but seeing it and talking to my friends and family, as well as my children, they're all really pleased that we've done it.
We'll wish you every success with it, and I do hope that people tune in and watch, because it's so important with the retelling and clearing up of so much misinformation. And it gives Caroline her voice back.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you. Caroline Flack, Search for the Truth is available to stream now on Disney+. And to read more, head to the link in the descriptor below to find our article on Cosmopolitan UK.